So welcome everyone to another one of our Conversations for Our Times presentations. Today we have with us Sister Eva Solomon, Congregation of St. Joseph of Sault Ste. Marie. She's joining us from Winnipeg. She's living in Winnipeg and doing her ministry there. She's going to present on us. Her presentation is entitled Healing in All Directions, Personal Stories of Reconciliation. And I was talking to a couple of people just before we were beginning, and this is a good time we need to hear about reconciliation. In the nation's capital, we're under siege right now. So let's listen to good news. And that's what I'm looking forward to Sister Eva's presentation. Reconciliation, as we all know, is an important topic in Canada, especially in our country and particularly within our own Catholic Church. Before we begin, I would like to begin with a statement of welcome and a land acknowledgement. So let us do that now. Here at St. Basil's Parish in Ottawa, we regard the love of God to be the foundation of all life and ministry. We believe in the ever-present love of God as witnessed through Christ and empowered by the Holy Spirit. We believe that each person is loved by God and is of sacred worth. Therefore, through God's grace, we welcome all people here this afternoon. We express God's hospitality in our parish by creating a safe, healing, accessible, and transforming place for all to enter. Further, sorry, I'm not going to further. Sorry. We want to acknowledge with gratitude and respect that here at St. Basil's, our parish is located on unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin First Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory, and we uphold and uplift the voice and values of our host nation. To make this afternoon possible, of course, we need the help of a couple of people, quite a few. We have a member of our parishioners who are assisting today. We have Kevin Burns, who is a parishioner. He serves as our tech person and our moderator. He has a background in editing and publishing. He's an author of several books, co-author also, and he has a history in broadcasting. You're going to see that in action today. We have, I think, Marianne McLean. Is she with us? I don't know. Okay, she's with us. And she's going to actually introduce Sister Eva, a more formal introduction. She has been actively engaged in the process of reconciliation in Canada through her work with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She still remains engaged in the work of reconciliation. Then at the end, after Sister Eve, at the end, Jim Ramsey, another parishioner, who is also a very engaged person in our parish, especially in social justice issues. He's going to thank formally Sister Eva. He's at present, he's our representative, our parish for the development and peace. I also want to acknowledge other members of our Conversations for Our Times committee. We have Rosemary Williams, Elizabeth Elliott, and Norita Fleming. Without these people, we would have, our work is possible with everyone participating. And so I just wanted to introduce those. Now, before I turn this over to Kevin Burns, who will take over, Sister Eva has invited Giselle to have a kind of opening hymn in our language, Anishinaabewan, Ojibwe language, and she's going to sing to us the Ave Maria in Ojibwe. Thank you, Giselle.
Thank you.
Miigwech, Nundam ya Nodin Windam Chimanido. My name is Giselle, and I learned the Ave Maria song last summer, and I'd love to share this with you in Ojibwe, my ancestors' language. Kidan makon mani Mwash kineshka guyen Jawen jigewin de benjige iwijie Oshme kiki toi wenda gosi and chi what ikwe wa kiki chi toi wenda gosi ge wegeme geje manido kiki chi toi Marie, wegeme gejimanido, ganonda maawishina, bata ejuebzian, nungwa ge. Epini boyam, mi game, mi game.
English.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Burns, who will talk about the more technical aspects of this presentation.
In a city where there's a lot of noise, here we are, 108 people having a conversation this afternoon. Our goal this afternoon is to have as many people speak as we possibly can after Sister Eva's presentation. So what we ask you to do in the reaction bar, in the reaction icon at the bottom of your screen, there's a function called raise hand. If you would like to raise a question at the end of the session, please raise your hand. And all of that does, it puts a little check mark in your screen and we can invite you to ask your question. We invite you to ask your question. Today is about conversation. Today is about dialogue. If you don't want to ask a question but would like someone else to ask the question, then just put it in the chat line and we'll try to get as many of those questions up as we possibly can. But the focus of today, the first part is a lot of listening, and the second part, we hope, is a lot of dialogue and conversation. And I now would like to introduce Marianne McLean, who will introduce our guest.
Marianne McLean, are you here?
I am. I was waiting to be introduced. I thought I was going to say something.
Maybe I introduced you too soon. Marianne McLean is a parishioner here. She's been actively engaged in the process of reconciliation, especially by working on it in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's still something that is in her heart and what she continues to do today. So thank you, Marianne McLean, for welcoming Sister Eva Solomon.
Thank you, Father. It is my great pleasure to introduce Sister Eva Solomon. Eva comes from a large Anishinaabe family. Her father, Art Solomon, a respected poet and elder, and her mother, also named Eva, were her inspiration. Both Eva and her sister Priscilla joined the Sisters of St. Joseph and supported each other in living out their vocations. Dr. Solomon has degrees in education and first served for 13 years as a classroom teacher. She developed an interest in cross-cultural ministry and is strongly committed to the development of a truly Indigenous Catholic Church. She sees Aboriginal people's deep awareness of community as a gift to be shared with others in Canada. Sister Eva is a sacred pipe carrier and a sweat lodge leader, and she conducts various other traditional ceremonies. She focuses on the enculturation of faith, bringing together Catholic and Indigenous traditional ways. Sister Eva offers an analogy to understand seemingly different faith traditions. Think, if you will, of sunlight shining through a crystal. It's the same light refracted into different colors. It's just the same God whom we worship, but in different ways. Sister Eva has devoted her life to working with her own people and with other Indigenous peoples in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Most recently, Sister Eva served as director of the Building Bridges project for the Assembly of Western Catholic Bishops. The stories that Sister Eva tells will help us grow in understanding and love for the gifts which she and all Indigenous peoples bring to the Catholic faith, a world in which there are blessings in all directions.
Thank you very much, Marianne, for that introduction. And I would like to invite you to put your pens down and just listen. That's the way we originally were as Anishinaabe people. We learned only by listening and observing. We were promised that when we need something, the Spirit will give it to us. And secondly, it's going to be recorded, so you should be able to get a recording of it from Daryl, however you get it. Megazikwe. My Indigenous spirit name is Eagle Woman, and my clans are Deer and Bear. My baptismal name is Eva Solomon. Bindigan, welcome. Welcome to our tent, our shared homeland. I'm not going to, Daryl has spoken from the perspective of the parish, so I will leave that because I'm all alone here in Winnipeg in a sense, from when it comes to where we're speaking from. And I want to first say something that I believe is critical to our future, and it has been since we began. We will never know who we are as Canadians until we know who we are in relationship to Indigenous peoples. That's a key relationship in our Canadian identity. My mother used to tell me that we were, that immediately after Priscilla and I were baptized, we were taken to the altar of the Blessed Virgin Mary and placed on her altar to consecrate us to her and her protection. And I don't know if she did that for all of us or not, but I know she did. I recall that she didn't do it for some of the youngest ones, but I can remember her telling me that for Priscilla and I specifically. One of my earliest memories was when I was coming home from Aunt Agnes's and Uncle Joe's, and it meant crossing two big fields of several acres or so. And they lived in that next several acres beside us. And I remember it was around supper time. It was kind of dusk, but enough to see some things, but not everything. And I saw a herd of what I thought, I was only about 3 years old. I saw what I thought was a herd of wild horses. And so that made me very cautious. I felt like I had to walk very slowly and very quietly. And as I walked, I said, Jesus, save us. Jesus, save us. Jesus, save us. Because that was the only thing that would keep me grounded in walking slowly. And I recall that as sort of my very first deliberate prayer on my own, although we prayed the rosary together. When I was 4, I was sitting on a rocking chair mending my brother's socks. And Uncle William was there visiting my mom and dad. And Uncle William was talking about going to Blind River. And to stay at a nursing home because there was none in my village and he needed special care. I think he had had a stroke. I forget exactly, but I know there was a reason why he had to go to Blind River. And somewhere during that conversation, I realized very clearly that I was going to be a sister when I grew up. And I never wavered from that thought. From then on, I told everybody that was my plan, even though most people didn't believe me. In fact, I've been working on reconciliation of Indigenous Catholic relations since I was about 3 or 4. And that was when my grandparents and other of my relatives from Wikwemikong came to our bazaar to dance some Indigenous dances. When I wanted to dance with them, I was told, no, you can't, because those are only for Indians, not Catholics. And I wondered why it was okay to do Indian ceremonies in other circumstances as well, such as when old Mrs. Rock, she died before we had roads or anything. And I remember the women washing the body of the dead people with cedar bath or picking cedar boughs to replace the palm branches when the breakup of ice delayed the possibility of getting palm branches for our services. Because the ice on the Georgian Bay was too soft for the horses and sleighs to travel over, but not strong enough for airplanes to land. And we had no roads in our town. Besides, we used to go in the fall to pick all these little green trees about this high. Only about 8 or 9 inches. And we used to decorate. We picked them in the fall and brought them and hung them underneath the parish church where there was humidity to keep them nice and green. And we would decorate our church every Christmas with what we called princess pines, for long bowers and wreaths that went the whole length of the church. At 7, I was in grade 1. In those days, we didn't have such a thing as kindergarten. We had a 1-room schoolhouse with grades 1 to 8 in it. Grade 1 to 4 faced one direction, grade 5 to 8 in the other direction, and we had a box stove in the middle. And the littlest ones sat in the middle because that was where the warmest space was. And I came home one morning at 11:30 in tears. And I asked my mother, why did they call me a dirty Indian? It was a very painful experience that I've never forgotten. Not because of what the children said, but because of what my mother said. I can still see her sitting by the big green chair and doing some work there. And she stopped and put her arm around me like this And she said, they do that because they're ignorant. And ignorant means they never learned anything different. Those words comforted me many more times in my life, because what I later realized was, while she had healed me and restored my dignity as a person, she never demeaned or put down the others. She simply made a statement without blaming anyone. So she actually was the one who reconciled us, because I couldn't go back to school the next day with my head held. I could go back to school with my head held high, knowing that my classmates didn't know and hadn't learned anything different. And it reminded me of that other statement. I believe that it's critical to our future. We will never know who we are as Canadians until we know who we are in relationship to Indigenous peoples. By the time I was 10, one of my mother's youngest brothers came to live with our family. Clement was in his 20s when he came, but he was not a normal man. He had just come out of the sanatorium near Hamilton, and he had lost 7 ribs and 1 lung to TB. So he couldn't lift a pail of water, he was so weak. But he did do cooking and craft work and music, which he was very good at doing. He lived with us for about 3 or 4 years, and it was like he needed to do that in order to live out his teenage years, because those were spent in the hospital. And because Clement had similar interests as me, we became very good friends. When he left, he went to Maine, USA, and from wherever he went, he would write to me, and it seemed he would wait for me to answer him. One very early morning, Uncle Johnny, one of my mom's brothers, came to give Mom some bad news. He told her that Uncle Clement had just arrived at another of our mother's brother's place in Montana, and they had brought him to the hospital with pneumonia. With only 1 lung, that was very bad news, and Uncle Johnny said by now he was probably dead. I was just getting up and coming down the stairs when she told me, and I said, I don't believe it. And I went back upstairs and began praying a rosary novena for him to get better. And he did recover. And although I thought it was maybe because of my prayers, I don't know that. I just thought that because I thought I was so close to Clement. I kind of connected it with my first prayer when I said, Jesus save us, as I came through the field from Mount Agnes's. It was like God answered my prayer then, and he answered my prayer when I prayed the Rosary Novena. And then after Clement, Uncle Ernest came. That was one of my mother's younger brothers. And I was already considering joining the Carmelites or another contemplative community. But after Ernest went back to the Manitoulin Island, he was bitten by a Mississauga rattler. I wrote to Clement to tell him about that, and he wrote back and said, nothing can ever kill Ernest. That was almost a prophetic statement, because in 1956, when I was in grade 9, my family moved to Sudbury so that everyone could have a higher education, because in my village there was only up to grade 10 in our school. We moved by trucks driving over Georgian Bay for about 15 miles of ice. on March 18th to get to the highway because there were still no roads in my village. And from there we drove to Sudbury, where they lived for most of our lives, but for me, that only meant 2.5 years. While I was there and going to high school, a tragedy happened to Ernest. And this made me ask again the question that changed my life. Ernest had been beaten by his friends after a dance in his village, and he was left in the ditch or fell into it and remained there for the night before his mother found him the next morning. He was still alive, but he had serious damage to his brain. In those days, I was getting a ride to school with my brother because there were no buses that went to where we lived on Maley Drive. And I had to wait till 5:30 to get a ride home. So I went from 7:30 to 5:30 every day at school. But when I was finished classes at 3:10, I would walk to the hospital and stand by Ernest's bed and pray for him. The sisters at the hospital were very kind to Ernest and his wife and 2 small children. They allowed his wife to stay in the hospital for 2 or 3 weeks with her children. And one day I was standing at the foot of Ernest's bed praying while the nurse, Mrs. Orell, was feeding him. And she was the only nurse that could feed him with a spoon. The rest couldn't do that. And she spent many hours massaging him and putting cream on him so that he wouldn't end up with bed sores. And one day when I was standing at the foot of Ernest's bed praying, I was praying to Blessed Kateri Tekakwitha and hoping for a miracle, and at the same time half doubting that miracle would happen. And that's the moment when I asked myself, why do we Indians do this to ourselves? We drink and we fight, we hurt each other and we kill each other and we kill ourselves. Why? And immediately I knew the answer. And I said, alcohol is not the problem. It's only the symptom. The real problem is that we don't know who we are as Indians. And we don't know our own beauty and goodness and dignity. In that moment, I knew what God was wanting of me. I was meant to work with my own people and to help them to recognize the beauty and goodness and dignity. Again, I never wavered from this decision either. I was now very clear about what I wanted, or rather the direction that God wanted me to walk. And because the same sisters were in Clement and Ernest's village and in Blind River where my uncle went, and in Sudbury where Ernest was, I knew that if I entered that community, I could work with my own people. And again, for me, it was critical for us to do that because we will never know who we are as Canadians until we know who we are in relationship to Indigenous people. In March of 1959, on the Feast of St. Joseph, Mother St. Bride was there at the school, and I asked her to allow me to join the Sisters of St. Joseph of Sault Ste. Marie. And I also made it clear to her that I wanted to work with my own people, the Ojibwe people. I didn't care whether I was a teacher or a nurse or a cook, whatever it was, as long as I would work with my own people. And in those days, we had to have a letter from our parish priest and the vocation director from the diocese. Well, it just so happened that our parish priest was the director of vocations for the diocese. Priscilla didn't know yet that I think she didn't know. I might be wrong, but that I had asked Mother St. Bride to enter. In July, she decided to enter too, the same year as I did. And as it happened, we both spoke to the pastor, and he looked at her and he said, "You can go." Then he looked at me and said, "You can't." And I was quite devastated and annoyed with him, because I had said all my life that I was going to be religious when I grew up. But Priscilla never said anything to anyone that I knew of. And I have to say I was disappointed, to say the least. It took several years for me to get over it. But later on, I realized that if I had gone as well as Priscilla, my mother would have lost the top 4 children in the family, all in the same year. Only then did I see it as a blessing in disguise, because my mother had 6 other children at home to look after. And my having to stay home made it easier on her. At that point, there had been 12 in the family and 2 other men boarding with us. And we had no running water in the house, so it made it a big difference to have another pair of hands to help Mom. Because we also had a wood stove, so that was for my next 2 brothers to help with the wood and hauling water from the beach and many other chores. And I had to help them too. Every Tuesday morning and Saturday morning, I helped my mother to do the washing by heating water in a tub on the stove, and by making 2 big batches of bread, 30 loaves each. In the end, after 6 long months, Ernest died, and no one was ever charged with his murder or manslaughter. However, there was a traditional way of dealing with that. I don't know for sure if it was used or not, because I entered in September of 1960, and Ernest died in October of that year. And while I was teaching in Northern Ontario in a couple of different villages in White River and Manitouage, I started traveling with my parents in the summer and working for Oxfam, helping people in far distant villages to learn how to use some of the tools that we had. We flew into many communities in northwestern Ontario to help build and establish cooperative stores, which were really just one-room log cabins, to help Indigenous communities get fair prices for their craft work, and then bringing the work down to Toronto Exhibition to sell and bring back tanned hides and beadwork and materials for crafts, that people would get a fairer price than the normal way of getting them there. Because when you have to travel only by plane, you have to also pay for your craft things by weight. And glass, beads, and tanned hides are very heavy. And phones were non-existent in the villages except for one radio phone for the whole village, if any. And some still had the original stakes in the ground from when they were discovered, quote, by airplane pilots that started flying over that territory by England in the Second World War. Some of these stakes were dated as 1939, 1947, 1949. And in some of the villages, there was a great big division over churches that were sent to convert them. In one such village, there was a small 5-foot causeway where we could walk from the main place where we were staying over to the island. The Catholics lived on the island, and the Anglicans lived on the mainland, and never twain shall meet. So we decided to build log cabins for the cooperative store on the Anglican side of the causeway. It worked. The Catholics came across the causeway to sell their crafts and were willing to put some small amount of money into the cooperative store. And very often it was the personalities of the pastor that created the divisions in the communities more than anything else, because they were vying for souls to win to Christ. And they were absolute power in their villages. When I was in White River during Lent in 1963, I used the Stations of the Cross to teach about the time coming up, the Holy Triduum of Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday, and Easter Sunday. And at one point I invited the children to each read a paper about their Station of the Cross. And at one point I invited to them to read them to the class. And I was deeply touched by the way one little Indigenous girl described Veronica. She said, Veronica offers a healing cloth to Jesus. I've never forgotten that. I could imagine how grateful Jesus must have felt for her kindness and her generosity on his way to Calvary. She had to do it for all of us. And I still use that expression when I come to the sixth Station of the Cross. It's sometimes not that we need to reconcile with another person specifically, but others can do that for us. And that's what Jesus was doing. And it was also what Veronica had done for the sake of all of us. This is a kind of new awareness for me as I write this paper, and yet I've lived all my life realizing that Jesus, through his Spirit, reconciled us to the Father. Wow, that's a powerful reality. In 1986, I started working for the Diocese of Thunder Bay in all the reserves of that diocese, in numerous reconciliation workshops, as well as coordinating with a team at the annual Native Pastoral Seminar, working to reconcile Indigenous rituals and ceremonies with Catholic teachings and faith traditions, and Cattery prayer days. And it was in that diocese that the bishop asked us, teach us about the traditional teachings of your culture and traditions. And we began with a smudge, and then to the naming ceremony, and then the idea of enculturated versions of Christian baptism, etc. The bishop was very truthfully into the sense of the faithful enculturation. Once when we asked him to bless cedar oil for us at our ceremonies, he asked, why do you want to use cedar oil rather than olive oil? And my response was, well, God never gave us olive trees. We said, well, that makes sense. And I said, that's what our ancestors used for healing oil in the past. So he went to the rubrics and he found out that it only says oil. It doesn't say it has to be olive oil. So he began to bless cedar oil for our Indigenous people as healing oil. And if we were to look up certain words related to healing, we'd find these. The Merriam-Webster dictionary says heal is a verb, meaning to make or become healthy, sound, or whole. And as a noun, it simply says healer. Reconciliation is another word that means to cause to be friendly or harmonious again. It also means to adjust or settle differences, or to bring to submission or acceptance. I prefer the definition that Laura Reimer used yesterday. She said, reconciliation is a place where truth and mercy, justice and peace meet. I'm speaking only from my own life experience about healing and reconciliation. But I also want to speak about my understanding of reconciliation and how it has developed to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. TRC was held in Canada between 2010 and 2016. The TRC was not a parliamentary decision, but rather a court-ordered decision to deal with the serious negative effects of the residential school system that have pervaded Canada's relationship of the land, and since the very beginning of our history, since the beginning of our story of colonization. And that's why I say we won't know who we are as Canadians until we know who we are in relationship to the Indigenous people. The residential system, however, only epitomized the whole process of colonization. Even up to the present time, it does it. One of the things that we just heard again this weekend was a reminder to the city of Ottawa and the policing that when the native people started a stand-in at, I believe it was Grand Cache, when they stopped the railway, and that was on their own land. The police were there in no time and dismissed them. Here we have another kind of protest, because they were protesting for their own land, and that CPR would give them some either land back or reimbursement for that land. And here we are waiting 10 days and the others have to wait. But the residential school system only epitomized the whole process of colonization in Canada. I think what woke people up, and I mean that in terms of Canadians in general, was the painful finding of 215 burial sites at Kamloops Residential School. And since then, we've had a number of others. I think at 197 at another place, and there's another one in Cowessess. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in their 94 calls to action, said, reconciliation is a process of healing relationships that required public truth sharing, apology, and commemoration that acknowledges and redresses past harms. But the healing act is a human experience. I showed that earlier in the stories that I told. We're not the only ones who experience the need for reconciliation. That's the goal of many, and I dare say most human beings on earth. It's the human condition which we in our Catholic faith would say are the effects of original sin. It began with Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, etc., etc., etc. If you look at almost any creation story on earth, you will find something of the same pattern as we heard of our Christians, that there was some kind of catastrophe, whether it was a flood or a landslide or whatever, but the people died because it was themselves that had been the cause of that tragedy. A holy man once said to me, the greatest gift Jesus actually showed us in his own life was that he never let anyone take away his inner peace, that peace with his Father and the Holy Spirit. He never let what others said, like Peter, I don't know the man, or another, the high priest who said he's a blasphemer, or one of them that called out, Hail, Rabbi, as Jesus said when he kissed him, or anything else to take away his inner peace. For me, that's healing, because he never lost his inner people, his inner peace. Is it reconciliation? I don't know, because the Gospels don't speak of any kind of public truth sharing, apology, or commemoration that acknowledged and redressed past harms. At least, he didn't do it in those terms. Jesus was usually silent in those circumstances, but I believe he was reconciling our sinful selves to the Father in his mercy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sister Eva. We are going now to open the conversation part. So if you have a question to ask, let's raise your hand by clicking the reaction box or fire off a note in the chat line, and we'll get to as many voices as we can. But before we start thinking about whose voices we hear first, I know Sister Eva has a particular way of a desire for framing how we actually begin this conversation. What do you want to hear, Sister Eva?
I would like first for us just to take some quiet time to think about what you want and to allow the Indigenous people to speak first this time. Whenever you are ready, you can place your image of your hand like this. See those hands? I just did it to show them. So
I know there are several Indigenous people with us this afternoon, and
So
there's
let's begin with Dolores Pelcher-Corky.
Dolores.
Dolores, your question, please.
I don't think it's really much of a question, but
it can be a comment.
A comment or yes, thank you, Sister Eva. First of all, I really would like to thank you. I remember you as a child. We are related.
Yes.
Our mothers were sisters. We did have a grandmother who was very strong-willed and very committed to her Catholic faith. And that's where I find that I have become a follower of my grandmother, my late grandmother, our late grandmother, Jane, and my late mother, Rose. So in listening to your story today, it really brought back a lot of memories as I'm shaking my head, thinking about listening to our family history. Even though I wasn't born at that time, I was born in the early 60s, and I remember hearing about Uncle Clement and Uncle Ernest. And it's really nice to be able to make that connection and to be able to understand your talk today, because I am at that path right now where I find that I am trying to understand my upbringing as a Catholic person, but also at the same time as an Indigenous person, and living, learning the traditions and the culture itself. And the tough part about it all is being able to live both lives, and where it's not an easy path, because there are so many obstacles and challenges along the road that make it seem almost impossible to either follow the road, the red road, or follow the Catholic Church. And I really don't want to choose. I want to be able to live both lives. And so I think this is where I think as Indigenous people, we should be able to have that choice to do that. And I really do feel strongly about my Catholic faith, and I really, I'm very thankful that there are family members that are, who are in the religious order. And I really would like to make more connection with you, and just to, follow up on our family history, and to be able to hear more of those stories, because I want to learn. And I have often said that, growing up, I've never really been around learning about our traditions and our culture. And I think that it's time for me to do that. So I want to say miigwech for your talk today.
Miigwech.
Thank you, Dolores. I'm now actually going to ask Donna Norton to take the the microphone, because in the middle of your session, Sister Eva, she put a heart symbol as you were speaking, and
Oh, yes.
it would be lovely to know from Donna what that was about. Donna Norton, please.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, hi, Donna.
Hi, Eva. How are you?
Good.
I put my heart up because she speaks to what I feel. She's validating how I live my life. And she's very, it's a very powerful experience for me sitting here listening to all it's probably the first time really that I'd like to listen more, really, truly. So one of the, so I'm the leader of Cattery here in Ottawa. And that's exactly what we are doing, is we are bringing our culture and our faith together. And it's a beautiful journey for us. It's very validating, very healing. I still practice traditional ways. As a matter of fact, I'll be going to bear ceremony there next weekend. And my mother gave me our Catholic faith, and I am just so pleased and happy to hear such validation and such love for both of who we are. And it's true. I really do believe that Canadians will never know and never experience that unless they truly, truly understand the relationship with Indigenous people. So that's why I put my heart up while she was talking. And I also put my heart up through Dolores, because we identify together the difficulty that we face with trying to walk a traditional path, trying to walk our faith at the same time, because we're what I always say is unique birds.
Pardon?
We are unique.
Mm-hmm.
That we're not walking solely traditional, and I can never just be Catholic. I have to bring my Indigenous. Before, my Indigenous identity was, it wasn't a part of me, because of colonization, because of residential schools with my mom. But now that I have embraced that and I walk with it every day, I cannot go forward without it. You know what I mean? I hope that.
Yes.
So I thank you very much. And thank you, Father Daryl, for putting this together. You go ahead.
I'd just like for a minute to speak to both of you, Dolores and Donna. I was talking with the Western Conference of Catholic Bishops one time, and I used a scripture passage that I believe is true for us. You know the passage of Jesus when he says, "You are the branches and I am the vine, and the branch cut off from the vine dies." And I said to them, if I had been there, I would have said, "Yes, Jesus, and a vine that's cut off from its roots, it too will die." And that's what happened to us as Indigenous people. Our spiritual roots were cut off. And that's why it's taken so long. Not only that, but all of the laws for the colonizers. Thank you.
So Carol David is our next questioner. Carol,
Who?
please. Carol David.
Okay.
And she's unmuted, so go ahead, Carol.
I'm coming from a bit of a different angle. I was raised in the, I guess, settler background. And so my family has Métis ancestry. So I keep saying they did a really good job at killing the Indian and the child. We didn't know anything about our tradition, and that I have a Kokum several generations back who was a Ojibwe First Nation. And so what I'm doing now is trying to bring that part of my my ancestry to light. So I'm a member of Cattery Native Ministry here in Ottawa, and I'm trying to learn the traditional way that we were never taught. And I have family members in the generation of my parents who will deny that this ever was a truth, a reality. And I have siblings who I think are looking at me going, what are you doing? And so I feel so honored to hear your story and to be a part of Donna and Dolores's walk, because they live in my community. And I just want you to know that, you know, it's a real, myself too. I see myself as traditional and Catholic. And not only is it a struggle for us as Métis people, but we're trying to reconnect, and that's a challenge, but I feel very honored to be a part of this walk. I just wanted to share that. Miigwech.
Thank you.
So, Sister Eva, we have Margaret Sutherland, who's from Fort Albany First Nation, where she works with the community there. And she says she's very glad to hear your presentation. And she does actually remember meeting you, Sister Eva, when you were students at Lethbridge University.
Oh, yes, I remember.
So let's ask Margaret Sutherland to unmute herself and share her comments with you right now. I can find her on the screen. I'll do it. I can unmute you myself. I just have to find you. Sorry. Okay, so maybe we're not going to do that. Louise Heslop says, this was a wonderful, insightful image of the vine and branches and the roots that you used. It is an image that says so much. Who would like to raise their hand now? Well, somebody by the name of Priscilla Solomon wants to make a comment. Now, who would that be now? Sister Priscilla, over to you.
I just want to say, Eva, I'm really proud to have you as my sister.
Thank you.
And I'm also very glad that in your talk, you really communicated to me the sense of how reconciliation is so much of an internal process for each of us. You shared much of your inner world in those experiences. And that somehow as we try to reconcile within ourselves, with each other, with the world around us, it's so important for us to be aware that we have to go inward and find that power of God working in us to enable us to do the reconciling, to enable us to find healing in all of those different contexts. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sister Priscilla. Stan Fontaine is next. Please unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi, Stan.
Hi, Stan.
I'd just like to mention the present milieu, if you like, for the Indigenous people right now. They're talking about things like self-government, you know, and self-sufficiency and that sort of thing. And I noticed at the beginning of your talk, you talked about an Indigenous church. Now, how do you see that unfolding, like in the situation that we're in today? Like we were talking about reconciliation as well, and perhaps the self-governing aspect of church as well, probably. So I'll throw that question to you. Thanks.
Well, thanks. I was in at the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico. And one of the interesting things was that when I went there, I knew I was going on September the 29th, which was the feast of St. Michael, but I didn't realize that it was the 400th anniversary or 450th anniversary of her apparition. And so I had said to myself, I'm going to go to her shrine as soon as I have enough Spanish to ask questions. I went to Mexico on September the 13th, and I figured on the 29th I had enough to ask questions to get around. So I went to her shrine, and when I came out and came up into the shrine, I looked at the shrine and I saw several things, but three in particular. On my right, I saw the old basilica, and it was magnificent stonework. On my left, I saw the new shrine, and for me, it just didn't seem to fit, because even though it was the shape of a boat, it was like it wasn't welcoming like that beautiful old shrine. And then down in the plaza, I saw thousands and thousands of Aboriginal people, and they were doing all kinds of ceremonies with chickens and candles and eggs and alcohol and whatever. And all of a sudden, because I had played her part in plays a number of times, I remembered as soon as I saw the people, I remembered her word to the bishop, and she said to one, "Go to the bishop and ask him to build me a church that will honor my son." And all of a sudden, it's like I had a new reality before me. This is the kind of church she wanted, not the one that's falling into the ground because of earthquakes, and not the one that doesn't suit the environment, but this church of living native people. That's what she wanted as a church. That's what she was asking the bishop to build. And I'll do everything in my power to help that church become a reality. That's how I saw that. And so I don't think it matters when that happens, but that it does happen. That's how I see it.
Thank you, Sister Eva. We have two questions that I want to
Yes.
move to, and then we have a third question that is going to be a bit of a surprise for you, which is going to be a good surprise, I can reassure you. So we'll go to Kathleen Kelly next, please. Kathleen?
I find it very powerful to hear personal stories, and so I appreciated your sharing. I guess as a non-Indigenous, I sort of am learning about the history and traditions, but I'm not sure where we go from here as Canadians, let alone Catholics are struggling with where we go as Catholics, but as Canadians, how do you see us moving forward?
One person at a time. We relate to another person. That's how we do it. And so it's work, a lot of work. But if each time somebody does relate to another one, an Indigenous and a non-Native or vice versa, then we are making progress. And at one point, there will come to be what is called like a critical mass, and then things will start changing.
Thank you, Sister Eva. We have many versions of that same question of what happens now, what do we do now? But I'm going to ask William Fellner now. He was next in line. If you could unmute yourself now, please, William.
Yes, I just wanted to share that I've forgotten exact times and dates, but something like 40 years ago, my wife and I decided we were living in Mississauga at the time, and we decided to take a break from the routine. And so together we made a 7-day retreat out in Thunder Bay.
Yes.
And Priscilla Solomon was one of our facilitators. It was a very, very precious experience. And I have two strong memories. I mean, and it's lived with me. I feel it really opened my eyes to the possibilities of one-on-one relationships, not just but the two things I remember was partway through the week, I borrowed a bicycle and I biked over to the Sleeping Giant
Mm-hmm.
in the bay. And we had been given a bit of tobacco to as a medicine to use as we wished. And so I went and I kind of spread the tobacco there as I looked back on Thunder Bay. So that's one memory I have.
Mm-hmm.
And the other was we had different sort of, you might call them extracurriculars in the retreat, different groups. And I decided on the spur of the moment to get involved in liturgical dance.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it opened up a whole different dimension of spirituality for me. So I really appreciated that. So I just wanted to share my thanks for that great experience of one-on-one relationship, as you mentioned a moment ago.
Thank you, William. I'm now going to ask a final question in this segment from Nobuo Obukuro. Would you unmute yourself, please?
Okay, for those who didn't know, my wife, Mary Lou Ayatel, late wife, was First Nations.
Yes, I remember her a lot.
Yeah. And one of the things she taught me when I was talking with her was natives around the globe, whether you're talking Guatemala, Mexico, or South America, or Africa, or the Aborigines in Australia, is you've gone through a lot of troubles that you need some sort of reconciliation to try and come out of that hole that they dug and put you into, sort of a pit. And part of it is you'll never experience love, peace, and joy unless you're grateful for the God's gifts that you are receiving every day.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I guess bothered us was when Black Lives Matter came
Mm-hmm.
on the scene. I was telling Mary Lou, and she also agreed, is all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to love all our brothers around. They may not be of the same color, skin, background, etc., but we need to show that love. Otherwise, we'll never experience that peace and joy that comes within a community. And so we can't be fighting each other. We have to be grateful for just being alive every day.
That's right.
Yeah. So I thought I'd express that.
That's very good. And we also need to learn to love ourselves. If we can't love ourselves, we can't love others.
Yeah.
Thank you. I learned a lot from Mary Lou Ayatel in Timmins when she was living in Timmins. I was teaching her daughter there at Gorman High School.
Mm-hmm.
I loved Mary Lou. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Teachers always know how to unmute themselves and sneak in over the wire. That's great. When we planned this session, we had the awareness that we have an opportunity this afternoon that we would really want to end with. And that is, we have two significant spiritual leaders involved in this, many spiritual leaders involved in this conversation, but two in particular we want to draw attention to. One is Sister Eva, who is the focus of this presentation. But here we are at St. Basil's with Father Darrell Winkler. And we thought, here is a rare opportunity to hear two significant leaders in this complicated and difficult dialogue. They've been listening to each other many times over the years, but listening in a very particular way today. So what we'd like to do now, Sister Eve, and this is our surprise for you, is just simply put you and Father Winkler into conversation, and we'll sit back and listen, because we have much to hear from you.
He's another one of our cousins. Okay, Daryl.
Well, let's see. I don't know what to say. I don't know. I didn't plan anything, but one of the things that you did, what can I say? You talked about the bishop in Thunder Bay in the 80s saying, teach us. I want to learn more. And I forget his name. What was the name of that bishop?
That was, I think you were the one that did brought the cedar oil that time for him to
No,
bless.
that wasn't me. There was another Native person that was before my time. I was still I don't even know if I was in the seminary yet. There was a Franciscan, a Native man who was a Franciscan. So
I know. I know who you mean.
Yeah. So anyway, that during the mid and early 80s, there's a participant on here named Stan Fontaine. I know he was involved too. Mary Lou Iatail was. There were a group of people, Native people, with the encouragement of the Oblates and the Jesuits, who were trying to imagine what would an Indigenous church look like. Of course, it's not, we're talking about many different cultures in Canada. There wasn't just one lump. Like, it's many different Indigenous churches in Canada. But my experience was, my mother died in 86. And she died at a young age. I believe it was from the effects of colonization. You talked about, you need to learn to love yourself.
Yeah.
You need to respect yourself. You said that your ministry in the beginning was trying to get Native people to recognize their own beauty and dignity. A lot of Native people didn't have that.
Yeah.
A lot of Native people didn't think of themselves as good, or they thought of themselves as second class. My mother was one of those persons in the mid 80s. She, and I would beg her, I'd get a little award at school saying, I'd say, Mom, can you please come? Would you please come? And she'd say, oh, I don't want to go. They'll all stare at me. They're all gonna, and when she finally would come, she'd sit in the very back row, hidden in the shadows. So that's how she perceived herself. That's colonization, saying your way is not as good as ours. Your culture is not as good as ours. Your religion, your spirituality, it's not as good as ours. And we'll be beneficent, and we'll lift you up to our level, you see. So that's what my mother went through. And in 86, when she died, the Jesuits were experimenting with liturgy. And, today it would only be elders to do these things, but the Jesuits were trying to encourage the Native people who have been taught for so long, you can't do these things in church. So they had to do it. So at my mother's funeral, there was a smudging with an eagle feather, and the Jesuit did it because the people had been told it was not right in the church to do that, so they wouldn't do it. So the Jesuit, he smudged my mother's casket around. And I remember the reaction of my uncles and my aunts around that. They said, oh, what is he doing? What's he doing? It was something new at the time. This is 86. And so we're still, and would it be that all bishops were like the one in Thunder Bay?
Yeah, that was Bishop O'Mara.
O'Mara, if they were like inquisitive and say, oh, teach us more. We want to learn more, but that's not the case. In fact, he's a very tiny minority of bishops in Canada who are inquiring, interested, who don't see it as a pagan act. Because we still have bishops in Canada, let's be honest, who think our spirituality really is still less than.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, bringing beauty and dignity to Native people, that's my goal too. But, and it can seem overwhelming because most of my family, my cousins, my aunts, lots of people, they don't go to church anymore. They've had enough. They said, there's too much. I can't, don't talk to me about the church. They don't want. So it's really a challenge in this day and age to be a minister. Ask Donna Naughton, ask Margaret Sutherland. I think she's doing some ministry. And what is it to be a minister, to do Christian ministry with Native people in this present time? without reconciliation. I can't wait till the Pope comes, whenever that will be, because we need that. We need the official person of the head dog to come and say to us, we're sorry for, and I'll be there because I'll listen to it, because he's apologizing to my mother,
Yeah.
to my aunts and my uncles who went through this whole god-awful system, that put them in second class. So that's what I'm looking forward to. So I don't give up hope. I'm like you, Sister, and Priscilla and Donna and Margaret and Dolores. And I think that we can still manage some kind of reconciliation, as small numbers as we are. It's still possible within our church too. We need the support of everybody. The bishops need to support us. Without them, it's going to be a challenge for us who are at the grassroots. That's all I have to say. I don't want to take, that's what I would.
Thank you.
I said I didn't know what I was going to talk about. Here I am talking. So anyway.
Well, thank you, Father Winkler, for not giving Eva Solomon much time to respond.
That's all right. I had time earlier.
That's fair enough. But I want to end this segment because we do have another piece that we have to do before we leave. Somebody by the name of Priscilla Solomon has been waiting so patiently to come in. Her hand must be tired. It's been up there all this time. Sister Priscilla, a few minutes with you, and then we are going to do the final segment of this event today.
Actually, I tried to take my hand down. It wasn't that I had another comment, but now I do have another comment.
Go ahead.
No, what I'm thinking, Daryl, I appreciate your sharing that struggle that we're having. One of the other struggles that I'm finding is the challenge of re-engaging Indigenous people who are Catholics, engaging them in a reconciliation process. Like you, most of our family does not practice the Catholic religion. And it's very difficult to get them to even think about any connection with the church any longer. But also where there are Indigenous Catholics who are practicing, they're very reluctant to come into a conversation around reconciliation. And so that's one of the struggles that I think is also a part of this whole process. On the one hand, I really encourage one-on-one reconciliation, one-on-one relationships, but you can't force people into a relationship. And I don't quite know how to engage more Indigenous Catholics, more Indigenous people, period. But it is one of our challenges. So it's not only the non-Indigenous people that are struggling with beginning relationships, it's also Indigenous people.
Thank you, Sister Priscilla. I'm now going to
ask.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask Jim Ramsey to do a formal thank you for this presentation today, and you'll understand as he's speaking why we've chosen him to do this.
Well, I wish I could understand that. In fact, trying to say thank you on behalf of 110 people is an overwhelming task, and I'm not dead sure how I should start. Well, I actually am dead sure how I can start. I'm going to be a coward, and sister, I'm going to put you last. I'm going to begin by saying thank you to two people who are, I know, listening to us. And one is your mother, Eva, and the other is your father, Art. And I say miigwech because you've given us a beautiful soul and you've allowed her to reveal herself to us and to ask us a very central question, which all of us should ask over and over again, which is, who are you? How do you know who you are? How did you get to be who you are? And where are you going in terms of who you are? And your sister, your stories really took us through the winding paths that question takes us. For example, I loved your story about coming to get grips with being rejected in terms of joining the sisters. And of course, at that point, unbeknownst to you, you had suddenly discovered that you were a critical member of the family and it was too early to leave that membership. And that was really, really a central moment for you, I'm sure, and especially for your mother, Eva. Well, as a consequence of this wonderful question, of course, we have probably at least 110 people right now sitting around and saying, well, who am I and how did I get there? And so for that, I want to thank you very much, because in such simple words, such a beautifully non-academic way, you've asked the central question, and then you've helped to answer that question in a language and with a spirituality that just absolutely leaves me limp with excitement and thoughtfulness. So thank you so much on behalf of everyone, on behalf of myself, and for spending this afternoon with us. You've been totally wonderful. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
And we now turn to Father Darrell Winkler for the final last word.
Okay, so what I want to know is that we are deeply appreciative to Sister Eva for talking. Meaning, I think all of us can say that quite easily. We're thankful that we were here today. And from our parish, we're just going to, I want to show you a gift that we're giving Sister Eva. It's a beaded object. It's this, I don't know if you can see it. It's a—
Yes, ever beautiful.
It's a tulip. It's supposed to be a tulip. And my niece has taken up beading, and she beads things, and she, so we wanted to give you something from her, and kind of Ottawa, the Ottawa thing with the tulip, you know. So we want to thank you. I'll get that to you, Eva. And then finally, I just want to speak 30 seconds about our next Conversations for Our Times. It's with Professor Catherine Clifford. She's a professor at St. Paul University. She's an expert in the Second Vatican Council, and that will be the theme of our next Conversations for Our Time. That'll be the first Sunday of Lent, March the 6th. And at St. Basil's Parish, that's the theme of our Lenten devotions, and our the spirituality of the Second Vatican Council. So that's March the 6th is with Professor Catherine Clifford. She's going to give us a panoramic view about the Second Vatican Council. On April the 24th, just to let you know, we have André Picard, who is the journalist with the Globe and Mail. He's written a book called Neglected No More. It's about the long-term care situation in Canada. He's going to be speaking on that. And finally, on May the 6th, we have an author named Simon Apolloni, who is an environmentalist, a professor at University of Toronto. He's going to be speaking to us on the environment. So we have a long list of really important speakers to help us have conversations for our times. So thank you. Miigwech. Miigwech to everybody. Au revoir. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'd be welcome to. I mean, I'd like to come back again if you want me.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll do that, Eva.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Eva.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you.
Thank you.
Honey.
Thank you. It's Margaret.
Thank you.
Which Mama P?
Which?
Which?
Thank you, Kevin, for keeping us online on time.
And thank you, St. Basil's, for putting this on for us.
And that Hail Mary was so special, too.
Yes.
Oh, that was great. Everything was great. Thank you very much.
You.
I hope you're doing well, Margaret Sutherland.
Hi, I'm glad I was able to listen.
I'm glad you were here with us.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I
haven't
wish
seen
I
you in
could
a
have
long-
seen you.
Next time we'll
Okay.
do it again.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk
Thank-
again.
Okay, I
Thank-
hope
What-
so.
Okay, thank you for being together. Get a chance to be together.
Okay. Watch it.
Watch it.
Okay.
Thanks very much. It was wonderful. And
Oh, I'm glad to
really
see you
good
too,
to see so
Priscilla.
many.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, do you see we got the same picture? In our background?
Yes.
Yes.
And I mean, St. Catherine.
St. Catherine.
Yeah, St.
She
Catherine.
looks a little familiar.
Thank
She
you.
looks a little
Yeah.
familiar. Okay, God bless
Okay,
you all.
God bless you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care,
you, Beth.
everybody.